How do you define your masculinity? No, really, I'm asking you personally how you define your masculinity. Because I feel like we've been hearing so little from individual men and so much from supposed professionals and the general public what masculinity is, that I sometimes begin to wonder if what we're being told masculinity is in any way actually resembles the way the average man actually experiences it. This is something I'm hoping to explore a little bit more about in today's episode of Men's Mental Health. Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. If you'll all indulge me, I'm going to divulge from my initial introductory question to explore my own experiences for a moment. I don't often give much thought to my femininity. I mean, I know that I'm a woman and that I tend to present myself in a feminine manner. But when I try to conceptualize myself, feminine is not often a word that readily springs to mind. In fact, many of the ways that I regularly carried myself growing up were decidedly unfeminine. But when I do sit and think on my femininity, the first thing that comes to mind for me is not a rigid societal checklist of traits associated with the term. I know some folks might balk at that, but I think, in fact, the balking would only be further evidence for what I mean. I grew up in the girl power era, where young girls were given a ton of messages claiming they can be anything they want to be, and that they do not have to hold themselves to impossible standards in order to fit a mold. Messages of empowerment and diversity of skills and hobbies and appearances were common. Women are strong, women are powerful, women can do anything that men can do and more, and perish the thought that a strong, empowered woman is any less feminine than a petite, demure 50s housewife and mother. When addressing the feminine, messages were always focused on the positive. They were focused on individuality and acceptance of differences. We do not see this kind of treatment in the masculine. When it comes to the masculine, we often see two things. One, the very rigid manner in which the concept of masculinity is defined, and two, the focus on the ways in which masculinity is harmful, and very rarely, if ever, on the ways it is helpful or positive. So when I refer to rigidity, I mean that if you look up any article talking about masculinity, you're likely to find a few traits repeated over and over again as defining features of the term. Traits like stoicism, aggression, risk-taking, competitiveness, ambition, strength, and power. You don't often see the mold-breaking kind of attitude being taken in articles and advertisements aimed at femininity. At least, you don't see it in a positive sense, which brings me to my second point. You almost never see mainstream articles or advertisements talking about negative or toxic femininity. In contrast, much of what we see today talks extensively about toxic masculinity and how it is a problem. Any mold-breaking articles you might see aren't really coming at this subject in the same manner as articles addressing women and girls. Where women and girls might be told that you can do anything and still be a strong and beautiful woman, there's this kind of pervasive, patronizing, and sometimes even mean-spirited approach in articles talking about how men can do better, resist their toxic traits, and challenge societal expectations of them. They may claim that this will be better for them, but we know that's not their focus. If it was, they would be asking men how they can better support them to be less constrained by rigid roles and expectations, if this is even something they want, rather than telling them that aspects of their core being are harmful and destructive and that they need to change or even discard them. I've had a hunch for a long time that this strange, rigid approach to masculinity didn't really reflect the lived experiences of the average man, and it occurred to me that when we see discussions of masculinity, we really don't have much input from the average man, do we? It's all teardowns and no substance, almost like a straw man of what masculinity really is. So I thought to myself, let's change that. Let's get the input of some actual men in here. What follows are the responses of several men to whom I asked the question, how do you define your masculinity? I define my masculinity as both my biological configuration and something that gives me my inherent sense of honor, integrity, and artistic expression. I'm a man, which means I'm a balanced human being with masculine and feminine qualities who can take care of others but also needs care himself. I define my masculinity as the ability to be an island. To clarify, the ability to take care of my own issues and life with minimal outside help, as well as to be able to help the people in my life when they reach out for help. I think a good term for it would be personal strength or independence. If a situation or problem happens to me, I should be able to come out on the other side with as few scars, physical, mental, financial, etc., or losses as possible. Not necessarily always coming out on top, but at least minimizing the damage that happens to me and my loved ones. And being independent or an island doesn't mean being completely cut off or refusing any help. Just that reaching out for help should be done when I can't adapt or develop the ability to deal with the issue. I guess another aspect of it would be some measure of self-honesty and awareness as well. At the very least, I should be able to acknowledge my own faults. Even if I don't have the strength to face my demons, knowing they're there will help me deal with them. I used to define myself more by whatever positive female attention I could garner, but I've realized by now that way lies madness. One defining characteristic of masculinity is the willingness to undertake the obligations that make life bearable and comfortable for others without the expectation of accolades or recognition for doing the things that need to be done on an everyday basis. I seem to have noticed that there has been an undercurrent of these are things that need to be done in order for our civilization to function, but little thought is given to those who perform those actions, as to many people, the performers of said actions are in certain ways invisible on the social radar. But we are progressing towards a model of where those who are actually performing said functions are starting to be viewed as evil, oppressors, or the recipients of privileges or status that isn't fairly due to them, because insert appropriate bullshit social justice reason here. And now they are fair game for denigration, disparagement, and disrespect. In full view of even these factors, men still work to make sure that civilized life does continue to function while being viewed through such a lens of disrespect. Women should not get to define what masculinity is. It's mostly to be stoic and to be in control of one's emotions and environment. Men should be able to have time away from women, and men's clubs should be a thing again. I am trying to recover a masculinity that hasn't been prevalent in my country for decades. I am gentle, but I act on strong convictions. I spend my time on things I feel will make me a better and more complete person, not necessarily what is in vogue or what I think a romantic partner would find attractive. I'm not ashamed of my feelings, but neither do I flaunt them. I try to live true to myself and to create a pocket universe around myself that is equally true to me. It's harder for someone older to define masculinity, I think, just because masculinity, femininity, and gender identity were much less prescriptive and gender essentialist when I was growing up. The idea of gender as separate from sex hadn't been invented yet, and masculinity was less, I have these behaviors and intellectual traits, than I have this biology. The only real personality difference or attitude I would say was built into the perception of masculinity was that men were expected to show more courage and fortitude than the average woman, and women were expected to show more compassion. A man who showed cowardice might be called girly, but was more likely to be called a coward, and a hard-hearted woman might get called mannish, but was more likely to be called cold or hard-hearted. If you look at the tremendous range of Tolkien's male characters, or the male and female gods of polytheistic religions, you see that gender was not viewed as determining much about your personality at all. Growing up, I came to the liberating conclusion that there is no masculinity beyond simply being a man. I could never identify with traditionally masculine interests such as beer, soccer, and discussing women's butts. So for a long time, I thought I wasn't really a man, until I realized that I am a man, and that it's nobody's business to tell me what that is supposed to imply. These responses are all unique and individual, certainly not so easily summarized by a simple list of traits. I found many of them to be beautiful, even poetic, and many of them reflected more of a desire to be able to help and care for others than a reflection of oneself. I think about many of my own experiences with men in life, and I can say that this desire to care, to build, to create definitely resonates with me. But moreover, I think this little exercise has shown that, like femininity, masculinity means a whole broad spectrum of things to different individuals. It doesn't really track that we can distill masculinity into a rigid set of traits and then discard the bad ones. It seems to me, for many men, it is kind of akin to a compass for the way that they'd like to lead their lives. So when people say things like this, what exactly is it that they are saying? What exactly is it they are seeking to destroy? Let's talk about this in a little bit more detail on tonight's episode of Men's Mental Health.